we're going to look at is the idea of animation. And there are 4 significant parts to animation, and we will go through each individual piece. The first part is the idea of a sprite. And what a sprite is a two-dimensional object, a single image that when worked with other individual sprites makes it look animated. And the way that we do that is we generally grab what's called a sprite sheet. I'm going to find a sprite sheet. Pretty sure I got one on my desktop. And yeah, I'm going to call it Simple Man. And Simple Man's sprite sheet is transparent right now. So before class today, what I did is I brought this into Photoshop and I chopped out all of the background colors to it so that it's completely transparent. That is really super important as we start dealing with this. The other thing is that you should always give credit to the artists that you're using inside of your video games, especially if you plan on producing this and trying to make money off of that. You have to make sure that you have all of your copyright infringements and information all handled ahead of time. This is a sprite sheet that I got from freegameart.com. So this is publicly put out there that they actually encourage everyone to use it. A lot of artists are totally okay with you using their artwork. It just takes a ridiculously long time to do this on your own. Like this would probably take me a week to do. So I'm just going to borrow someone else's and hopefully use it. So I'm going to click on this, and you'll notice that my inspector changed a lot of the settings inside of here. Now, Unity right now believes that the texture type that I'm looking at is a default. What the heck is a default? Well, it really means that Unity's not really sure exactly what it is. It knows it's a picture, but that's about it. I'm going to change the default. You'll see this little drop down, and I'm going to change it to a sprite, 2D, and UI. That just means it's a two-dimensional image user interface. And the next thing, this one's super important, is there's a little sprite mode, and it thinks it's a single sprite right now. In other words, it believes that this guy right down here is a single image that you would use inside of your game. But we know it's a sprite sheet, and the sprite sheet contains a whole bunch of different images. So I'm going to change the sprite mode from single to multiple. I'm going to apply that setting, and this is a really cool feature called the sprite editor. What the sprite editor does is it chops up your individual images from your sprite sheet and separates them so that you can use any individual one that you want. So I click in the top left, there's a slice option, and then I'm just going to click the slice button. And I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but each one of the individual images is now surrounded by a rectangle that shows that this guy is chopped up. I'm going to apply the setting, close that down, and what I can do now is I can expand my sprite sheet and see the individual images that made it up. You guys, I'm not sure if you've seen this before, but you can also change how big these options are inside of here. So if you want your images to be really big, you can expand it as well. All right, so that is step number 1. Step number 2 is that I'm going to create an animation. And an animation is a set of sprites that work together to create movement of characters inside of your game. So I'm going to create by clicking on the button. I'm going to have an option here to name this. I'll just call this guy walking. And I'm going to make sure it's saved inside the assets folder. And then I got to find my walking sprites. Now it looks like maybe this is the first walking. Perhaps that's the last one. So I'm going to hold shift and click on the first and the last. Then I'm going to click. I just have to make sure the one thing that my character is the one that's selected. That's actually really important. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to do that. So from this one to this one, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag and I'm going to drop those over there. And that's pretty much it. So the idea that we can chop this up into individual sprites that make an animation. In original video games, this would take weeks and weeks to do, to make sure that they're anchored properly, that they're centered, that the images all look like they flow together. Now it takes a matter of minutes to be able to do this. Now I can even see what my animation looks like inside my game scene by just pressing the play button. And that is my walking sprite right now. Doesn't it look wonderful? What looks wrong with it?
Too fast.
Way too fast. Okay, why? Well, my sprite, the sprites that I'm using, it looks like I've got, what, 8 of them in total right now. And if I use 8, they're running at 60 frames per second. So that means that this is running close to 8 times a second. If you ever watch the Summer Olympics and the speed walking, that's pretty much what he's doing right now. So I'm going to change the samples. There's a little box here that you can edit how many times per second it happens. So let's go with 8. Maybe I want it to take roughly about a second to complete its full walking animation. And if I press play, sorry, we just have to be out of record mode. I got to make sure I'm on my character, and I'm going to press play again. And that looks probably a little bit better, wouldn't you say? Now this is also the default animation that we're going to use, which means that if I start playing my game, this is what we're going to see as soon as I press the play button. What do you notice about the play button the way it is right now? It's red. That doesn't usually happen. What's happening is that it's recording. It is recording any changes that I make inside Unity, and it will apply those directly to your animations. Most of the time, you don't want that to happen. If you moved your character just a little bit right now, that change will take place inside the animation, and it will overwrite any movement that happens in the script. That means you can't use your script anymore to move your character, and that's a big problem. So you really have to be very careful about making sure the record button and the play button are pushed off inside your animation before you make any changes anywhere else. Now I'm going to press play. And now my guy's just walking around. Okay, and I can move him. I can jump. And now it looks just a lot better. Just so you know, I'm using the same script right now, the simple platform controller script that you guys use for your basic platform tutorial that Unity posted on their website. I haven't changed anything inside of that script other than the animations that we're working on right now. All right, and you're welcome to do that in your future games. If you've already got a script that works, don't recreate a new one. Just use that script, modify it to make it better so that it best suits your character. So that's step 2. Step 1 was chopping up our sprites. Step 2 is creating an animation. If you want to create another animation, just underneath the record button, there's a drop down. We're going to create a new clip, and I'm going to call this clip jumping. I'm going to save it in my assets folder, and now I've got to find all my jumping animations. I'll start with this one. I guess I'll go to this one. Maybe those ones aren't the best looking, but you can always pick and choose individual ones that you want as well. Let's clamp it down to about 8 frames per second again, and let's see what that guy looks like. So when he's in the air, he's going to be doing this. It will cycle through, so we could probably stretch that out to make it slow down just a little bit more as well. I'm going to stop that animation. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at is called the Animator. The one that we're looking at right now is the animation. The Animator is a little window that allows us to choose when we're moving, when we're transitioning from one animation to another. So right now I have a walking animation and a jumping animation. Those are the only 2. And I can go in between those by creating transitions. I right-click on my box, make a transition, a little white arrow allows me to choose the next little brick that we want to make the transition to and from. And if I can go from walking to jumping, then I must be able to go from jumping to walking. And now this is the most important part. Our script is going to be talking to the animator, the thing that we're looking at right up here right now. And we're going to have to send messages from our script to the animator to allow it to know when we're changing from one to the next. And the only way we can do that is through the use of variables. And there's a special type of variable in the animator called a parameter. It's right up here in the top left corner. And I just need to make sure that that's selected. I'm going to create a new variable, a new parameter, and I have a choice between 4 different options. This variable is going to be used to tell whether or not I'm jumping, whether I'm on the ground or I'm jumping. What type of variable should it be? A bool. Very good. How come? Yeah, either I'm jumping or I'm not. There's only two options, and that's exactly what a bool is really good for. I'm going to name this guy jumping with a capital J. I'm just going to have to remember that later on. And I'm going to click on one of the white arrows. The white arrow that goes from walking to jumping, I can now set a condition for when that happens. So right here in the bottom right, there's a little plus. And the condition is to go from walking to jumping is if jumping is equal to, there's only two options, true or false. Which one would it be?
False. True.
True. Yeah, so if I go walking to jumping, that means I now am in the process of jumping, so jumping is equal to true. And in the opposite direction, we're going to go from jumping to walking, and the parameter or the variable will go jumping is equal to false. And that's all it takes to decide when you go from one of those animations to the other set of animations. Clearly, you can make this more complex. If your character has 5 different animations, maybe for shooting, for running, for dying, this guy's going to get pretty complex. And you're going to have to understand how I can transition from which brick to from one to another. And sometimes it just doesn't make sense to go from a brick to another brick based on what the names of these are that you call it. So that's step 3. You just have to set up your animator. And now the most important step is to change the value of this jumping to make it true or false based on our script. So the script, again, that we're using is the same script that we used for our basic platformer. This is called the Simple Platform Controller. And it has an animator variable. It's a private variable. I'm choosing to call it NM. In the awake function, sometimes we also use the start function, I get the component animator and I set it equal to the anim variable that was created on line 15. Okay, this is really important. What it does is it connects from your character the animator right here with your script. And your script is now allowed to change things inside of the animator. In particular, what we want to change is this guy right here, that variable. So we have to hook it up so that they can talk back and forth to one another. And then right here in my update function, I am constantly checking if my character is on the ground. This line cast is really taking the ground check game object and seeing if it's layered on top of a layer called ground. And if it is, then that turns true, and if it's not, then it turns false. So I'm going to say if grounded is ever true, that means my character is standing on the ground. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the anim variable, which is a bool, so I'm going to set the bool. The name is jumping. I'm getting that directly from the animator, and I'm turning it into grounded is equal to true. Yeah, so I'm turning the jumping variable into false because he's grounded. And then down here, I'm going to copy and paste that. And in my else statement, which means grounded equals false, my jumping will then be equal to true. And if I save that and all goes well, fingers crossed when I press play, and actually I'm going to keep the animator up so that you can see the transitions as they happen. So right now my guy is walking. His jumping variable is set to false. I jump. It gets checked. Did you guys see it get checked? Now, why is the animation not happening? It's clearly checking right here, and then when he gets grounded again, actually he gets grounded in the middle of the air. That's a little weird. What's probably happening is that the animation right now has an exit time. It has to last a complete second before it's allowed to move to the other animation. So you can click off the has exit time and even the fixed duration, and then sometimes that will be enough to actually make the animation happen. It's not perfect, but you can certainly fiddle around with some of those options there. And that's pretty much it. You can now move from one animation to another, and it's one of the best ways to make a video game look more professional by having these animations take effect. All right, do you guys have any questions?